They didn't leave a name for themselves, no statues, no great kings, no written legacy. Yet their arrival ended an age. The story of the Sea Peoples doesn't begin with conquest. It begins with collapse. Around 1250 BCE, the Bronze Age world stood tall. From the Aegean to Mesopotamia, great powers traded, warred, and negotiated. Egypt basked in divine kingship. The Hittite Empire controlled Anatolia. The Mycenaeans flourished across the Greek mainland, and along the Levantine coast, rich port cities like Ugarit and Byblos acted as crossroads for goods and ideas. This was the world's first age of globalization. Tin from Afghanistan, copper from Cyprus, gold from Nubia, grains from Canaan, horses, chariots, slaves, ivory, wine, scrolls. They flowed across borders on ships and camelback, feeding a fragile harmony built on dependency. But behind the gleaming palaces and sacred temples, the system had cracks. The Bronze Age world was an intricate web, complex, centralized, fragile. When food didn't arrive, cities starved. When scribes weren't paid, literacy faded. When merchants vanished, whole economies went with them. By the mid-13th century BCE, those cracks widened. Droughts struck across the eastern Mediterranean, hard. Climate data from tree rings and lake beds reveals decades of arid conditions. Famine followed, and then earthquakes. Modern geology confirms dozens of seismic events clustered around the Aegean and Anatolia. Walls fell, grain stores shattered, fires spread. To make matters worse, rebellions began. Across Greece, Mycenaean palaces burned from within. In Anatolia, regional governors turned rogue. Entire provinces vanished from Hittite control. Egypt faced labor strikes, bandits, and plagues in the Nile Delta. This wasn't the end of a kingdom. It was the unraveling of a civilization. Into this chaos, scattered groups of migrants began to move. They came by land. They came by sea. Some were desperate, some were organized. All of them were looking for survival and opportunity. They would later be known by the name given to them by Egypt, the Sea Peoples. But at this point in the story, they were still forming, still gathering, still watching the world burn around them. And somewhere along those coasts, in the fragments of failing cities and the camps of starving refugees, the greatest unknown force in ancient history began to rise. In the early 13th century, BCE, Pharaoh Ramses II ruled an empire that stretched from the Nile to the Levant. But even the great Ramses, builder of temples and maker of peace with the Hittites, began to notice something strange along Egypt's borders. Foreigners, new names, unfamiliar weapons, a different kind of threat. Egyptian inscriptions start to mention outsiders, the Shurden, the Luka, and the Shekelesh. These weren't traditional enemies. They were warriors who came not from kingdoms, but from the sea. And not just warriors, families, wagons, livestock, entire communities on the move. Ramses II would famously incorporate some of these groups into his army. The Shurden, in particular, were skilled fighters. Their horned helmets and round shields became a symbol of elite guard units. But this temporary alliance masked a deeper storm brewing offshore. By the time of his grandson, Ramses III, that storm hit Egypt full force. According to the inscriptions at Medinet Habu, Egypt faced a coalition of foreign invaders unlike anything it had seen before. They came in massive ships. They came with their women and children. And they came with the intent not to trade, but to settle. This was not a raid. This was an exodus with teeth. The Egyptian reliefs are chilling. warriors wielding swords and spears, ships packed with fighters. Battles raging across both land and sea. One enemy vessel, toppled and drowning, spills its crew into the Nile as Egyptian archers rain arrows from shore, but the records are also proud. The invaders were annihilated, Ramses boasts. Not one escaped. Egypt had won. For now, and yet even in victory, the writing was on the wall. Ramses III's defenses had held, but just barely. The cost was enormous. The treasury strained, grain stores dwindled, Egypt's grip on Canaan and the Levant, once firm, began to slip. The battle was won. The age of empires was dying. And elsewhere, no one was so lucky. Across the Aegean, the palaces of Mycenae began to fall. In Anatolia, the once mighty Hittite Empire fractured and disappeared. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to charcoal and bone. In the confusion, the sea peoples kept moving. Some came as warriors, some as settlers, all as survivors of a world breaking apart. And their march had only begun. The collapse wasn't a single battle. It wasn't even a campaign. It was a slow-motion catastrophe. City by city, port by port, the world of the Bronze Age came undone. We know the names: Mycenae, Troy, Ugarit, Hattusa, Alasia, but we know them as ruins, and we know how they fell. Through fire. Archaeologists digging through the layers of these once great cities find the same chilling evidence: blackened stone, scorched timber, crushed bodies beneath rubble, and stores of grain left untouched, as if the destruction was fast, brutal, and unexpected. The city of Ugarit, a wealthy coastal hub in modern-day Syria, was a jewel of the age. It traded with Egypt, Cyprus, and Mesopotamia. Its scribes were masters of cuneiform. Its king was in direct contact with the pharaoh. Then came silence. In one of the final clay tablets ever written there, a desperate message was scratched. The enemy ships are already here. The city is burning. The letter was never sent. In Anatolia, the Hittite Empire was already weakened by internal rebellion and food shortages. Then came the Sea Peoples. Their capital, Hattusa, vanished from history. In Greece, the Mycenaean palaces, fortified strongholds of kings and scribes, fell one by one. Pylos, Tiryns, Thebes, all destroyed in the span of a generation. Linear B, the script used by Mycenaean bureaucrats, disappears completely. So do the scribes. So does the culture. Entire economies imploded, trade routes dissolved, bronze, once abundant, became rare. Literacy, which had blossomed in a handful of centers, vanished for centuries. We call it the Late Bronze Age collapse. But that term masks the horror. Imagine entire civilizations crumbling, refugees fleeing burning cities, families lost, temples desecrated, crops stolen or torched, and from the ashes, silence. No monuments were built to explain what happened. No one chronicled the fall. Only the Egyptians, still barely standing, named the cause: the Sea Peoples. But were they truly the sole culprits, or were they the spark that lit a fire already smoldering beneath the surface? Historians debate this even now. What's clear is this: the world changed, forever. Egypt named them. History wonders about them. But who were the Sea Peoples really? They left no manifestos, no origin stories, no carved declarations of who they were or where they came from. All we have are fragments and theories, inscriptions from Egypt and scattered tablets from Syria, list group names: Shurden, Shekelesh, Luka, Denian, Ekwesh, Peliset. Scholars have tried to link them to known regions. The Shurden may have come from Sardinia, the Luka from southwestern Anatolia, possibly ancestors of the Lycians. The Shekelesh could be connected to Sicily. The Denian possibly share roots with the Danaans of Homeric legend, a Greek tribe. The Ekwesh have been linked to Achaeans, another Greek name. And the Peliset? Most scholars believe they became the Philistines, who would later clash with the Israelites in the Old Testament. But these links are just that, possibilities. The Sea Peoples were not a single tribe. They were a coalition, a movement, a tide of humanity, displaced, disillusioned, and dangerously organized. So what drove them? Famine, climate collapse, earthquakes, civil wars, the breakdown of international trade, in short, everything. The Bronze Age world had stretched itself thin, politically, economically, environmentally, and when that world started falling apart, people moved. Some migrated peacefully, others violently. The Sea Peoples were likely a mixture of all kinds, former mercenaries from collapsing kingdoms, farmers driven from their land, raiders from the islands, displaced tribes pushed further by other refugees. They came not just with weapons, but with knowledge. They knew how the old world worked. They had been inside its palaces, its ports, its armies. And now, in a desperate new age, they turned that knowledge into survival and conquest. They were neither barbaric nor primitive. They were highly organized. Their ships were advanced, their tactics brutal, their movements strategic. And most telling of all, they brought their families with them. This wasn't looting. This was resettlement by force, a human tsunami shaped by disaster, crashing into a dying world. The Sea Peoples didn't win through numbers alone. They fought with precision, with experience, and with weapons born from the very world they helped destroy. Egyptian reliefs at Medinet Habu show warriors with horned helmets, short kilts, and circular shields. Their swords curve like sickles, optimized for slashing in tight combat. These were not crude tools, they were weapons forged by skilled smiths, likely looted or brought from Bronze Age cities they once served. Some wore bronze cuirasses, others fought in leather, light and mobile. Many fought barefoot, agile on ship decks and rocky coasts. They weren't weighed down, they moved like shock troops, but their real power came from the sea. Their ships were unlike the merchant galleys of Egypt or the ponderous transport barges of the Hittites. These were sleek, narrow warships, likely powered by both sails and rows of oars. Twin banks of rowers gave them speed. Their hulls were shallow, allowing them to land directly on beaches without the need for harbors. This mobility gave them the element of surprise. They could strike anywhere and vanish just as quickly. Imagine a quiet port city in the dead of night. Suddenly, torches appear offshore, oars splash rhythmically. By the time the guards raise the alarm, warriors are already ashore, setting fire to storehouses and cutting down the city watch. That was the Sea Peoples' advantage: rapid deployment, coordinated attacks, no mercy. They didn't just hit random towns. They targeted strategic nodes, ports, granaries, archives, palace centers. They knew the anatomy of the civilizations they were dismantling. And it wasn't just seaborne raids. Some groups advanced overland as well, likely through Anatolia and northern Syria, overwhelming weakened Hittite outposts and forging a brutal corridor toward the south. They also used psychological warfare. Survivors from one city would flee, bringing tales of horror to the next. Panic preceded them. Resistance often fell before the first ship arrived. It's even possible that Sea Peoples coordinated their strikes across vast distances. Attacks on the Hittites, Mycenaeans, and Levantine cities occurred in remarkably short succession, too fast for coincidence, some argue. Whether coordinated or contagious, the effect was total. By 1150 BCE, they had erased dozens of cities. They had leveled palaces, crushed armies, and emptied entire coastlines. Only one major power still stood between them and total domination: Egypt, and their most decisive confrontation was about to begin. The year is 1177 BCE. Egypt stands as the last major Bronze Age power. The Hittites are gone, Mycenaean Greece is silent, the Levant burns, and from the west and north, a wave of destruction approaches the Nile. Ramses III, the pharaoh of Egypt, is not caught off guard. He knows what's coming. Inscriptions at his funerary temple, Medinet Habu, offer the clearest account we have of the Sea People's advance. They came not just in ships, but also by land, a coordinated two-pronged assault into Egyptian territory. Ramses III mobilizes his forces. He positions his chariots along key inland routes. He sets ambushes near the delta, and at the mouths of the Nile, he stations archers and a naval fleet ready to meet the enemy at sea. What follows is one of the most dramatic battles of the ancient world. According to the inscriptions, Egyptian ships lured the Sea People's vessels into a trap. Archers on shore opened fire. Egyptian galleys rammed their foes. Enemy ships were boarded, capsized, or set ablaze. The walls of Medinet Habu show it all: warriors drowning, arrows flying, chaos on deck. Captives are marched before the pharaoh. The enemy is defeated. Ramses declares, "Those who came by sea, their hearts are finished. They are overthrown and slain." It is Egypt's greatest Bronze Age victory, and its last. Because even in triumph, the damage is irreversible. Egypt repels the Sea Peoples, but loses much in the process. Its hold over Canaan dissolves. Trade routes disintegrate. Internal rebellions flare up. Grain supplies dwindle. And perhaps most significantly, Egypt never again mounts a major military campaign beyond its borders. The empire enters a slow decline, its best days behind it. As for the Sea Peoples, many of their groups simply vanish after this battle, but not all. One, the Peliset, settles permanently in southern Canaan. They will soon be known to history by another name, the Philistines. By the year 1150 BCE, the world of the Bronze Age had ceased to exist. The great cities, gone, the palaces, burned, the scribes, the priests, the kings. Many of them vanished without record. And in the void, something new began. The Sea Peoples didn't just destroy, they triggered a transformation. After their invasions and migrations, the Eastern Mediterranean looked completely different. The centralized palace economies were gone, replaced by small, independent city-states. International diplomacy, once conducted in cuneiform between emperors, became a thing of the past. In the ashes of Ugarit and the Hittite Empire, new powers rose. The Phoenicians, master seafarers, began rebuilding coastal trade and spreading the alphabet. The Israelites emerged in the highlands of Canaan, carving out a foothold in a fractured land. The Philistines, likely descended from the Peliset, established fortified cities like Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron. It was the birth of something entirely different. The Iron Age had begun. With bronze supplies interrupted, people adapted. They learned to smelt and forge iron, a metal harder to work, but far more abundant. Technology changed. Weapons evolved. Economies shifted from elite-controlled palaces to local markets. And storytelling changed too. From the memory of collapse came epics. Some scholars believe the Homeric tales of the Iliad and Odyssey were shaped by this age of upheaval. The memory of burning cities, of wandering warriors, of lost homelands, and what of the sea peoples? They remain one of history's great enigmas. They didn't leave behind an empire. They didn't inscribe their triumphs in stone. They didn't write their names, yet they ended an age. They changed the course of history. Some were absorbed into local cultures, others vanished. Their descendants would go on to fight new battles, tell new stories, and build new cities. But the warning they gave us, though silent, is eternal. Even the strongest systems can fall. Even the most advanced civilizations can crumble. Collapse doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it comes from within, and the final blow just rides the wave. In our own age of interconnection, their lesson is not ancient. It's alive. The sea peoples came from the sea. They brought change, and the world was never the same again.